Was this in Westfield? Did you guys like?
All right, so for I'm gonna put part 3, but this could also be in. Didn't calibrate. Shame on me. I'm gonna put part 3, but we could have like some questions or reactions that also align with earlier parts, and we'll certainly go over some specific things. But wanted to kind of start off with any areas of concern or elaboration that you were looking for. Maybe it was something from part 1 that it comes up again in part 3 is what I mean as to how it could connect. But just like kind of general reaction, and then we'll go from there with it. So, any. It doesn't even have to be questions. Like it could be insight. Like you picked up on something, and then they clap for you. Assuming it's right. Or arguable, at least. Who was talking about the ending? Was it you talking about the ending? Or was it you?
It was her.
Saying that it was like just abrupt?
All three of us were like, yeah.
Okay, so like essentially what's up with the ending?
It was just kind of like, oh yeah, now the story's over. Oh, and the game sucks.
Too abrupt?
Almost.
Or like unsatisfying or?
Yes.
Okay, alright. So but the abruptness of it is what kind of strikes you. Okay, that's a good point. What else? Anything? I mean, you finally got to see Kurtz. Met the guy for like a whole 7 pages. So he did exist. Well, he's sick. It's not his fault. He can't walk well. Of course he's going.
But I was expecting to see him as like anything so.
You were expecting to see him.
As like a
Okay, so not a decrepit, old, worn out, weathered, beaten guy, but you were hoping for like that presence and all. Okay, so kind of like an ironic appearance by Kurtz. Although apparently the voice is still in like full throttle. Like that part works, but everything else is just like a shell of what supposedly was once there. Alright.
I feel like at the end, whenever he goes to see Prince's fiance, by like not telling her the truth, I feel like he puts this burden on himself.
Well, and even like an unnecessary burden in a way. Okay. So Marlowe unnecessarily burdens himself. So he should have.
I almost think he should have told her, because like I understand why he did what he did, but at the same time, like by not telling anyone, in a way, he's kind of like suffering like alone.
Do you think he should have told her? I mean, so this is you can see the effect of not telling her.
I feel like he didn't want to give her the wrong impression and like bad like images of what happened when I feel like he kind of wanted to keep her ignorant, I guess.
The problem with being a teacher is that like I stay forever young. But my forever young is like older than your forever young. As new batches of kids come in and all that kind of stuff. I'm still young, Morgan. Don't look at me like that. Anyone know the movie A Few Good Men? Back when Tom Cruise was like normal. Shay kind of knows it a little bit. Tom Cruise is in it. Demi Moore, which like means nothing to you anymore. Jack Nicholson, which should mean something to some folks. I don't know if he doesn't. But big climactic line is Jack Nicholson is pounding on the. He's kind of on trial at the time, and Tom Cruise goes, I just want the truth. And his line, do you remember it? Yeah, and you don't really know the movie. You can't handle the truth. Which you'll see in like movie montage, famous quotes, and all that kind of stuff. And like that kind of aligns for me here a little bit where she wants the truth and doesn't realize what she's asking for, and I think in his mind would be kind of going, but you can't handle it, so he said your name. Aw, I knew he would, because he's that kind of guy that steals ivory and decapitates people and puts heads on sticks. By the way, I took a walk yesterday in the neighborhood. Somebody already had Halloween decorations up, so
Yes, I love
Do they have heads?
they did not, but it made me think of it. Anything else, Virginia?
I don't know, just specific that like the heads were facing in.
Not out.
Because like usually you think it would be out because you'd be scaring people off. But like I don't.
But you look at them if they're facing in,
Yeah,
as opposed to other people. Yeah.
That's creepier, but
I respect it though in a way. It's creepy,
yeah.
but I respect it in a way. Sarah doesn't want to know in what way, but which I understand. One of the big, and this would kind of go with the ending, and not that we need to like kind of answer these things in chronological order or anything, but when we were talking about part 1 and 2, we did the whole thing with the frame tale, the frame story, with this whole unnamed narrator, and Sarah mentioned, that hey, we end back up on the Thames River. One of the things that we were kind of throwing around was like, why would we have an unnamed narrator framing the whole thing? Looking at the tale as a whole, does that end up playing any kind of part that we could see? Like would the story be different if Marlowe was the narrator? Was really what we were kind of looking at last week. By having that narrator, does anything become clear looking at the book as a whole now that maybe was not there before? You did the little.
I think the framed tale kind of almost provides a way for like Conrad to like tell the truth about like in general to Revere, because like almost like an ignorance is bliss kind of thing, because like what you don't know can't hurt you. Like they didn't know about the Congo, so like all the people just carried on with their own lives and they didn't care. But when they came back, it was like when Marlowe came back, he was like, "But you can't see all the darkness that's in the world. Like what's going on?"
And two things here. Number one, that can lead into the next question, which I wanted to ask anyway. What is the heart of darkness? Which we can now start to provide maybe some examples for. Number two, since you guys have an essay, coming in on Thursday, and that clincher, that conclusion is something that people always not always, but that a lot of folks struggle with. If you can provide some kind of truth or some kind of insight, about what was going on in East of Eden based on your analysis, that's a nice way to kind of end the essay. So you can almost kind of think of the narrator as like this clincher statement, that what is the impact of Marlowe's story? Well, we can kind of start to see something a little bit here with the narrator at the end. But going with that original question, what is the heart of darkness? And not that it gets limited to one answer, but what would be possibilities as to what do we mean by heart of darkness? Because we were talking about geography and maps and things like that as we were introducing it, and which is still a viable option. What would be potential things that you could make a case for as to what Conrad means by the heart of darkness?
Like the heart of Africa?
Okay, so still looking geographically, part central of Africa. Okay.
I know in one line they called Kurtz an impenetrable heart of darkness, so I guess he's on the darkness himself. It's like so sad.
So, that last part where you said so sad, is he a heart of darkness because there's a lack of happiness, or to Virginia's detail about the heads are facing inward? What a horrific person he is. Are you kind of going more of that, evil? He is the center of evil.
I mean, they also describe him as like a shell of himself, like he's just kind of empty, and I think he's like kind of symbolizing what happens to you when you go in there. I don't know exactly what that would be. He's just empty.
1920s, T.S. Eliot, who I can't stand, writes a really good poem. It's called Hollow Men. And the epigraph at the beginning is Mr. Kurtz, he's dead. And then it goes into, it's not about Heart of Darkness, but it's literally about what happens to people, you know, as you lose your soul and whatnot. And so he is like the pop culture icon at the time that he kind of uses to introduce that point. So that idea of him being a shell, emptiness, hollow, you know, you got a famous British poet on your side with that one. I just don't like him. I hate it when I do that. Yeah. Although it's my fault because I called on him first.
Wasn't Marlowe saying how like Kurtz's mind wasn't altered by his time in the Congo, but like his soul is what was really evil about him?
Which brings up an interesting thing: mind versus soul. You know, like, unfair question for you since you kind of brought it up, but how would you distinguish between the two? Like a person's mind versus a person's soul.
Like I feel like whenever people tell you like think with your head and not your heart, kind of like your soul is like what your internal like your self-conscious is trying to tell you, but your mind is like trying to use common sense.
Okay, so like rational or reason versus like feeling, and you said like consciousness, or not but subconscious. So his mind is what worked, his soul is what he lost.
Yeah.
Is he a rational, reasonable person? I mean, those are kind of like a loaded question, you know, in a way. It doesn't matter how you answer it. Does he have a rational, logical, pragmatic approach for what he does? I'd probably nod yes. Fear is a powerful, you know, motivator and whatnot. But at the same time, his rational, reasonable, pragmatic thought, it only works because that idea of empathy, sympathy, you know, completely removes itself.
I feel like in his mind he's doing the right thing because of what happened to him and his experiences. They've changed him so much. Like someone who hadn't been through that experience wouldn't understand.
Uh-huh.
He's doing.
Which is pretty much the conversation that Marlowe's having himself when he's talking to the intended, you know, where he puts his burden on himself. You just can't understand because you haven't been there. The passage that you folks did last week for your TWA kind of does the same thing. At the bottom of the first column, it goes, you know, I'm paraphrasing, but you have pavement under your feet. You're in a society with rules and regulations. He's out in the wilderness. You can't begin to understand, you know, what's kind of going on in his mind. It doesn't mean he's right necessarily. But there is something about what Kurtz does that Marlowe still seems to admire, because if he is like, you know, a horrific, horrible person, and make no mistake, Kurtz is a horrific, horrible person, usually those are the types of individuals that you want to expose. Be glad he's dead, lady, because things may not have gone well for you if he had come back, but instead, no, it's protecting that he was a wonderful man. You know, that cultured, piano-playing, music-loving guy that went off into the Congo, he was still thinking about you when he was dead. Virginia, you had a hand up, and then Sarah, I'll come over to you.
It was like he was talking about the Heart of Darkness at the end, but they were on the Thames instead of in the Congo, and so I think it's almost like the heart is more about like the wilderness, because it was about the jungle, but like a lot of the descriptive words they were using could also be applied to just like wilderness in general, and not just like jungle.
And I mean, and certainly with the Thames River, and this is, you know, very important part that both you and Sarah mentioned about. By the end, the narrator is going, and that waterway led into the heart of an immense, you know, darkness. Well, it's flowing through Europe. So, what is in some ways bringing darkness to the heart of Africa? Europe. And by Europe, we can even kind of take that a little bit further and just simply go, you know, imperialism in general. We didn't really get to talk about the prompt a whole lot when we were going over your essay scores last Thursday. One of the details that a lot of folks mentioned when they were talking about Kurtz was his background. Where's he educated? He's educated in England. What's the background of his parents? You don't have to remember which is which. But one parent is Conrad's Polish, but Kurtz goes that, well, not Kurtz, but Marlowe mentions that he has parents who are half English as well as half, remember the other, Ethan? French. Oh, smart board's kicking out on me. And even the name Kurtz, if you were to apply, ethnic label to it, say Kurtz is, actually even tells you in part 3 that it is German. Remember what it means? Short, even though he looks like this really big guy. So English, French, German, those are all imperialistic powers. So in a way, all of Europe has essentially contributed to Kurtz and made him the way he.
Because I actually was going back to the last point.
Mhm.
Part of the reason, and like the whole thing about like him being dishonest to the fiance, like didn't he promise to keep his reputation or something
Yeah,
to the Harlequin?
and so before he kind of runs off, which I mean that's a character in himself. He tried to kill me a couple times, but he's awesome. You should really love this guy.
Yeah, like he just tried to shoot me. It's fine.
Yeah, it's no big deal. Try to take some ivory, but can't do that. But even like when he turns in the document, because he has, the eloquent writing and all that kind of stuff, before he turns it in, he tears off the handwritten scrawl, exterminate all the brutes. The papers, when you have the journalist, comes looking for him and all that kind of stuff, he's not going to give up those things. So, yeah, he promises to essentially protect him, and then he follows through with it. So, and not a question that we're going to answer here in the next minute, why? Like, I would think if Johnny time travels and, works in close proximity to someone like Hitler, he's not going to be protecting, the world from, okay, this is what, I'm not going to tell you all the little details that are happening, but he seems to be a good person. No, we're absolutely going to expose something like that if we can. So what is it about Kurtz that is so, I don't know if alluring is the right word, but alluring, mysterious, consuming, but what is it about him that Marlowe is clearly not the only person, I'm glad you mentioned Harlequin, that people look at him and go, or meet him and go, I love this guy. Doesn't say I love him, but willing to protect him. Which is kind of a scary thing, but history has proven that to be true. If you can communicate effectively, you can get people to do just about anything that you ultimately want. So I'm going to write why. And then one thing we'll just kind of come back to this as well. Also want to take a look at how has Kurtz changed. And we kind of started to mention some of these things already, but in the passage that you guys did with the TWA, he makes talk about the original Kurtz, and now we have this guy here at the end. So what are, and I think it might be a detail that we tend to gloss over, what are specific things that would be different? So for example, original Kurtz intended, new Kurtz like the mistress and all that kind of stuff. Next one. I should plan to return to you tomorrow.